There's this moment a lot of people have, and it usually happens quietly, not dramatically, where they're sitting at their kitchen table or maybe lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling, and they do the math on their retirement savings for the first time. Like, really do the math. And they realize they're so far behind where they thought they'd be that it almost feels like a joke, except it isn't funny. Maybe they've been putting in a little here, a little there, a few $100s when there's extra money, nothing when there isn't, and they figure, okay, I'll catch up later. I'll invest more when I get the raise. I'll get serious when the kids are older, when the car is paid off, when things settle down. And then 10 years go by and things never really settle down, and they're looking at a number in their retirement account that just doesn't seem like enough, not even close to enough. My name is Jordan, and I spend probably too much time thinking about money, specifically about why some people seem to build wealth almost effortlessly over decades, and why others work just as hard, earn decent money, and somehow still end up financially stressed well into their 50s and 60s. I've read the research on this. I've talked to people on both sides of that divide, and the answer, most of the time, isn't income. It's not intelligence. It's not even discipline exactly. It's timing. And more specifically, it's understanding what compounding actually does, not in theory, not in the textbook sense you kind of half listen to in a finance class, but in the real, almost uncomfortable sense of just how little you actually need to do to let it work. That's what this video is about, because here's the thing that keeps surprising me. The amount of money required to start building serious wealth is, for most people, genuinely shocking in how small it is. The gap between doing nothing and doing something is much, much smaller than people assume. And most people are stuck on the wrong side of that gap for reasons that have nothing to do with money. So let's start with the thing almost nobody talks about when they talk about compounding, which is the way our brains are simply not wired to understand it. We are incredibly good at thinking in straight lines. If I save $50 a week, I'll have $2,600 after a year and $260,000 in 100 years. Linear, clean, easy to picture. But that's not how money grows when it's invested. It doesn't move in a line, it moves in a curve. And that distinction sounds simple when you say it out loud, but it completely changes the picture in a way that our intuition just doesn't naturally grasp. Think about a snowball rolling down a hill. In the first few seconds, it barely picks up anything. The snow sticks, sure, but the ball is small, and the coverage is thin, and the growth is almost invisible. You could look at it after 10 seconds and think, well, that's not doing much. But if that hill is long enough, and this is the part people miss, the ball eventually reaches a size where each rotation adds more snow than the last 10 rotations combined. The last 20% of the hill does more work than the first 80% by a massive margin. Human psychology hates this. We expect results proportional to effort and time. We want to see steady, predictable progress. And in the early years of investing, compounding genuinely looks like nothing. It's the part where people give up, get impatient, pull the money out for something else, convince themselves it isn't working. Here's a real illustration. Imagine someone invests $5,000 and earns 8% per year. After 1 year, they have $5,400. Cool. Not exactly thrilling. After 5 years, about $7,300. After 10 years, around $10,800. In 10 years, their money basically doubled, and for most people, that doesn't feel spectacular. 10 years is a long time. But here's where it gets weird. After 20 years, over $23,000. After 30 years, over $50,000. After 40 years, over $108,000. Same $5,000. Same rate. The last 10 years of that 40-year window added more dollars than the entire first 30 years. That is not a straight line. That is a completely different shape of growth. And if you're not viscerally aware of that shape when you're making financial decisions, you will make different, worse decisions. The fix, honestly, is just knowing this and keeping it in front of you. The math isn't complicated. The discipline required to stay in the game long enough for the curve to do its thing. That's the hard part. And it all starts with getting in at all. Okay, so here's where I want to get concrete, because the abstract version of this, start early, invest consistently, let it compound, is advice so vague it's basically useless. You've heard it, we've all heard it. What we haven't heard enough of is how little, specifically, is required. Let me tell you about two people. Call them Priya and Marcus. They're the same age, 30 years old, both earning about the same income, both have pretty similar lives. The one difference is that Priya starts investing $200 a month right now, and Marcus decides to wait 5 years and then invest $200 a month. Same amount, same rate of return. Let's say 7% annually. Same discipline. When they both hit 65, Priya has roughly $530,000. Marcus has around $350,000. Same monthly investment, same rate, same habit. The only difference is 5 years. 5 years that cost Marcus roughly $180,000. And those aren't 5 years from the end, where the money would have been growing the fastest. They're 5 years from the beginning, which means every single month of compounding that followed was slightly smaller because of that delay. And $200 a month. That's what we're talking about. For most people, that's findable, uncomfortable maybe, requiring some genuine trade-offs probably, but findable. It's roughly the cost of a streaming service, a few restaurants, and a couple of coffee shop trips per week. I'm not saying that to be glib. I know budgets are real and tight for a lot of people. But $200 is materially different from the $10,000 or $20,000 per year that people sometimes assume they'd need to invest before it makes a real difference. There's actually research out of Vanguard that consistently shows that time in the market matters more than the amount invested, particularly in early years. The return rate assumptions matter less than when you start. You can spend a lot of energy trying to optimize your portfolio, trying to pick better funds, trying to time the market, and the reality is that for most people, none of that matters as much as the simple decision to start, even small, even now. And this is the part that honestly makes me a little frustrated on behalf of people who wait, because the delay is almost never about money. It's about psychological friction. It's about not feeling ready. It's about waiting until they have a bigger lump sum, or until they understand investing better, or until they have a plan that feels official enough. And all of that waiting has a cost that they can see plainly in the math, but usually can't feel until it's too late. Here's a word that shows up constantly in personal finance content: consistency. Invest consistently. Save consistently. The advice sounds simple, but I think the word itself does some damage because people hear consistent, and they imagine this pristine, unbroken record of identical monthly contributions, and the moment life disrupts that, a car breaks down, someone loses a job, there's a medical expense, they feel like they've failed. They feel like they broke the chain, and now the whole thing is ruined. That's not how this works. Think about someone named Elena. She's 28, works in marketing, and starts putting $250 a month into a broad index fund. She does this for 4 years. Then she changes jobs, takes a pay cut, and has to stop for 9 months. Then she starts again at a lower amount, $150 a month, for 2 years. Then she gets promoted, ramps back up to $300, and is able to stay mostly consistent for the next 12 years. Elena never had a single perfect year of investing. Her contributions bounced around constantly. She had gaps. She had months where she could only do $50 and felt embarrassed about it. And at 65, she still has a retirement account in the high 6 figures, because the underlying principle, money in the market, given enough time, is more forgiving of imperfection than most people realize. The word consistent should mean something closer to generally and usually over a long period, not without exception or variation. You can miss months. You can have lean years. You can have years where you barely invest at all. What you cannot do, or rather what will cost you dearly if you do, is pull the money out, Treat the account like an emergency fund, or stop entirely for years at a time. The money needs to stay invested. It doesn't need to be the same amount every month. It just needs to stay. There's also something important about what happens during downturns, and I want to be careful here because this is genuinely counterintuitive. When markets drop, and they will drop reliably, periodically, sometimes severely, people who keep investing the same amount are actually buying more shares for the same money. The $200 that bought 4 shares last month might buy 6 shares this month. When the market recovers, those extra shares matter. Staying in during the bad months is often more valuable than the good months people stayed out of. I know that's cold comfort when you're watching a portfolio decline, but the math is real. This section is a little uncomfortable because it involves things that don't feel like mistakes when you're making them. There are basically 3 things that silently destroy compounding over time. The first is fees. The second is taxes. The third is withdrawals. All 3 are avoidable mostly with a little attention. And most people are losing money to at least 2 of them without really knowing it. On fees, a 1% annual fee sounds like almost nothing. On a $50,000 portfolio, that's $500 a year. You can barely feel that. But run it out over 30 years, accounting for the compound growth that fee would have generated had it stayed invested, and you can lose close to 30% of your final portfolio value to fees alone. 30%. That's not a rounding error. That's a very significant portion of a retirement. Most people don't scrutinize expense ratios. They pick a fund their employer offers, or one someone mentioned, or the one with the name they recognize, and they go. The difference between a 0.05% expense ratio and a 1.2% expense ratio, which is a realistic difference between a low-cost index fund and an actively managed fund, over decades is staggering. It's the kind of thing where, if you saw the final numbers side by side, you'd feel a very specific kind of quiet rage at yourself for not looking sooner. On taxes, the difference between a regular brokerage account and a tax-advantaged account like a 401k or a Roth IRA is significant enough that it can be worth a meaningful amount of money over time. In a Roth IRA, your contributions grow tax-free and come out tax-free in retirement. You pay tax on the money going in, and then compounding operates without friction for decades. That uninterrupted compounding is worth a lot. People who are consistently investing in taxable accounts when they have tax-advantaged space available are leaving money on the table quietly every year. And on withdrawals. This is the one that genuinely makes me wince. Someone has been investing for 8 years. They've built up maybe $40,000, and something comes up, a down payment, a business opportunity, a medical bill, and they dip into the account. Not only do they pay taxes and usually a penalty, they pull the money out of the compounding engine at a moment when it was just starting to generate meaningful returns. They essentially start over, but older. And the psychological damage of that is real too. Having to rebuild from scratch is demoralizing in a way that affects future behavior. The account is not a savings account. It's not an emergency fund. It's a compounding machine, and every dollar you pull out costs you not just that dollar, but every dollar that dollar would have grown into. I want to spend a few minutes on something that isn't about numbers at all, because numbers are only half the story here. The hardest part of letting compounding work isn't the math. It isn't even finding the money. It's managing the psychology of watching a number grow slowly for years while the rest of your life feels urgent and expensive and immediate. There's something researchers call temporal discounting. The tendency humans have to value things in the present more than identical things in the future. $100 today genuinely feels more valuable than $100 in 30 years, not just because of inflation, but because our brains are wired to discount the future in a way that's almost comically irrational. The part of your brain that wants something now, a vacation, a renovation, a nicer car, is working with a much stronger emotional signal than the part that's trying to visualize your retirement. This is why compounding is so easy to understand and so hard to actually do. You're not fighting ignorance. You're fighting your own neurological architecture. The people who win this psychological game are, in my observation, rarely the ones with the most discipline. They're the ones who set things up so that discipline isn't required. Automatic contributions, payroll deductions that move the money before they can spend it, target date funds that manage the portfolio automatically so there are no decisions to make. They remove themselves from the equation as much as possible. There's also something to be said for reframing the relationship with the account. Investors who check their portfolio frequently tend to make worse decisions than those who check rarely. Watching a portfolio swing daily or weekly activates loss aversion. We feel losses about twice as intensely as equivalent gains. And that leads to panic selling, bad timing, and exactly the kind of disruption to compounding that ruins outcomes. Check your account quarterly, maybe, set your contributions, and leave them. Pretend the money doesn't exist until you retire. It sounds too simple, but the research on what separates good long-term investors from bad ones keeps pointing back to the same answer. The good ones basically do nothing, and they do it consistently for decades. Here's what I want you to take from all of this. You don't need to be wealthy to start investing. You don't need a big lump sum, a financial advisor, or a perfect understanding of the markets. You don't need to wait until things are more stable, until the debt is paid off, until the salary goes up. The compounding curve is always on, always running, and every month you're not on it is a month you're not growing. The earlier section of the curve looks boring. It looks like almost nothing. But it's building the base for the explosive part at the end. And you cannot get the explosive part without the boring part first. $50 a month is better than zero. 100 is better than 50. Starting imperfect and irregular is enormously better than waiting to start perfectly. The math doesn't care about your plan. It only cares about when the money arrived and how long it had to grow. There's a line I keep coming back to from the behavioral finance research, and I'm paraphrasing here, which is that the best investment strategy is one you can actually stick with. Not the one with the highest theoretical return. Not the one your brother-in-law recommended. The one that's simple enough, automated enough, and psychologically sustainable enough that you'll actually stay in it for 30 years. For most people, that's a low-cost index fund, automatic monthly contributions in a tax-advantaged account. That's it. That's the whole strategy. The amount you start with matters far less than you think. The time you spend in the market matters far more. And the gap between where you are right now and where you need to be to start, that gap is almost certainly smaller than you've been telling yourself. Now, if you found this informative, like this video, comment your opinion and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.